Roberto was a beautiful baby. He never cried, his mother would say. He would sleep anywhere from 23 to 24 hours a day. He never cried because he wanted to eat. He never cried because his diaper was bothering him. But 3 months into his age, though, his parents knew there was something wrong. He wouldn't eat. He became overheated too quickly. And once he began teething, he began to bite his tongue and his lips up to mutilation. The next 2.5 years were constant torment for the young family. 60 doctors later and countless referrals, they found a doctor in New York University, and there he was diagnosed with a disease that caused him to not feel pain. And as of 2006, he was only one of the 17 people in the United States who suffered from that disease. Unable to feel pain, hunger, or extreme temperatures, victims of this disease, they can't sweat, so they become overheated. 50% of them that suffer with this die by the age of 3. While most of the people in the world will spare no expense to try to avoid pain at all costs, Roberto's family understands that a life without pain is devastating. Pain is that sensation that we all long to avoid, but it's actually a great gift from God. It's pain that lets us know that something's wrong. It's pain that motivates us to turn from dangerous behaviors. Without the help and the guidance of pain, we would surely die. So have you ever thanked God recently about the pain in your life? As much as you think that it would be better without it, a pain-free life would be a horrible life. Today we're starting a 2-week sermon series where we're looking at this topic of Thanksgiving. Being thankful. But pain or trying times, they're not something that we normally feel thankful about. But we all need to be thankful for even those most devastating times. For me, this sermon series really hit home the past couple of weeks because it getting dark at 5 o'clock, my depression has really got the better of me. And it's been difficult. You might have known how that feels, where it takes everything that you have to roll out of bed in the morning. But I look back at these times, and I try to be thankful for them. Because I know that it helps my dependence on God, and I know that it's helped mine and Nellie's relationship. With her being here for me, giving me comfort and encouragement. But being thankful for the difficult times in our life goes against everything that we know. Because when hard times come our way, we usually get upset. We begin to complain. But the Bible teaches us that we should rejoice over these difficult times. James 1:2-4 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And steadfastness has its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." Now, as we look at this verse, there's a couple of things about faith and the testing of our faith that I want us to look at. And the first is this. Faith is always tested. 1 Peter 2:12 says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the various trials when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." Our faith will always be tested. And James says that there's many trials and difficulties that we will face in this life. Now, this could refer to two different things. It could refer to types of trials, the emotional trials, the physical trials, the trials at home, trials at work, or it could refer to the source of our trials. And trials usually come from two different sources. There's those trials that we experience as a result of living a Christian life. In fact, that's probably what what James is speaking about here. Because he was addressing a group of believers who had been uprooted from their home and their families, all because they had faith. There are still many in our world who are experiencing this persecution because of their faith. Christian World Report in 2002 said that in China alone, 1,100 people are executed monthly just because of their faith. And in some other countries in the Middle East, to become a believer is an automatic death sentence. And we need to pray for our brothers and sisters that's facing that persecution, because it's a reminder for us to be thankful for the freedom that we have to be able to get up here and to worship God without restrictions. But for the most part, we have it pretty good. Our Western world, our trials usually comes from another source. They're the unknown. They're the unexpected experiences of this life. And that's probably where one of my biggest fears come from, is that unknown. But these trials help me to build my faith in God. That God is always here for us. That He has never left us. He never will leave us. And He always wants the best for us. I know I've told some of you before, but before we got this job and we got hired here, I didn't know where we was going to go. And I believe that was a time of testing for me, testing my faith to see how much I really trusted in God. But I'll be honest, I was scared. I didn't know where God was going to take us. And at times I questioned even if God still wanted me in ministry. It seemed like about every week we was getting a letter, an email back from churches that was saying they already found a minister, or they reviewed my resume and they're going a different way. And I wondered if I would ever find a church. I wondered if ministry was really where God wanted me to be. Or should I step away from it for good and try to find something else? You know, those times were difficult times for me. But they are also times that I can look back on that has made me stronger, made my faith in God stronger. Remember, faith will always be tested. And the purpose of testing your faith is to help see whether you have faith or not. Is your faith real? Is it strong? A jeweler gives as one of the surest tests of a true diamond what is called a water test. An imitation stone is never so bright as a genuine stone. And a genuine diamond placed in water sparkles, while the imitation, you can hardly see it. Place one side by side and it will be very obvious which one is the true diamond. This goes along with the next point that I want us to look at about faith. Is our faith, when it is tested, can actually have impact on others. Because no wonder not, people are watching to see how we react to difficult times like this. If we truly believe what the Bible teaches, then we will react differently when hard times come. We will be like that diamond that was in the water, that it just shines more brightly, while the other one can't see it. Richard worked in a hot California sun as a foreman of a large ranching operation. He and his wife, Geneva, also owned their farm and consisted of about 200 acres of almond trees. Then a year of bad weather came and skimpy harvest, and it forced him to find additional work. But that didn't help either. So he and Geneva took on additional loans to pay for their farming expenses, but that only put them deeper into debt. They spent many sleepless nights, struggling to find ways to cover all of their obligations. And one day, Geneva came home with the bad news. The bank was going to foreclose on their home. They was going to have to sell everything that they had, and the bank already had a buyer lined up. It said that they cried together as they realized everything they had worked for their entire life is now gone. And on top of all of that, they still owed $100,000. Richard was 50 years old. He had been farming his entire life. And now they had no money. And they had to start over. But even so, Richard said, in spite of the overwhelming loss and grief, I knew that God was in control of our situation. I remembered the Bible story of Joseph. Even as a slave and a prisoner, that young man was part of God's glorious plan. As for me, I knew that God must have something better for our future too. After a couple of years had went by, they were finally able to get back on their feet. And Richard received a call from the head of the credit company that foreclosed on his home. And the credit guy wanted to talk with them. And he insisted that he would make the hour drive just to see them. When he shows up, this is what he says. He says, I want to ask you something personal. A friend of mine recently lost everything he owned. His wife just committed suicide. But we at the office have noticed that you two are handling the crisis differently than most people do. Can you tell me your secret? And Richard said, we believe in the God of the Bible. He is sovereign over our lives. And he is in control. Even though the pain is real, we are confident of this. God has proven sufficient and able to take care of us. Geneva added, God's promises us, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. It was absolutely true. Throughout that entire ordeal, Richard could always say, we never felt alone for a single moment. Later, as the head of the credit company rose to leave, he thanked the couple. Before he left, he said quietly, he said, you've given me a lot to think about. Seeing how they reacted to the situation compared to others gave him a lot to think about. People are watching to see how we as Christians are reacting to difficult times. Do people see a different perspective on it than they do? Because we know that this world is not all there is. Or do we have the same reactions that they have? The last thing that we need to know about trials and the testing of our faith is trials rightly used will help us to mature. So Romans 5:3-4 says, we rejoice in our suffering, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit whom he has given us. So what does God want to produce in our lives? Through the difficulties that we face? Endurance, character, hope. Now, there's a story that I love to tell, and you may have heard it from me before. I know my Sunday night and Wednesday night classes probably heard it so much they're sick of it. But I love this story. And there was this women's Bible study that was meeting together, and they was going through Malachi. And as they were studying, they came upon this passage in chapter 3 that says, he will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. They didn't really know what that verse meant. So one of the women said, well, I will go see a silversmith, and I will come back and tell you what I learned, and to tell you what that looks like about the character of God. So that week, the woman called a silversmith, made an appointment to watch him work. She didn't say any reason why she was there, just for curiosity about the refining process. And as she watched the silversmith, he held a piece of silver over the fire, and when he began to let it heat up, he explained that in refining silver, One needed to hold the silver in the hottest part of the flame so that it would burn off all of the impurities. So the woman thought about that for a second. God holding us over the hot spots of our life. Then she thought about the verse again. He sits as a refiner and purifier of silver. So she asked him, is it true that you have to sit there the entire time? He says, not only is it true that I have to sit here, but I can't take my eye off of it for even 1 second, because there will be ruin if it stays in too long. So the woman was silent for a little bit longer, and she says, well, how do you know when it's done? And he smiled and he said, oh, that's the easy part. When I can see my reflection in it, I know it's done. You know, when we are tried, when we are tested, when we go through these difficult times in our life, we mature. The more that we mature, the more that we become in the image of God. And we can't do that if we don't face some difficulties in our life. It's on September 26, 1991, that 8 people were sealed into this biosphere. It's about a 3.14-acre glass dome located in Arizona. They was trying to do a study designed to test whether we could survive in a dome like that we might try to put on somewhere like Mars, somewhere in outer space. But while the group was able to survive there for their 2 years that they was hoping for, they considered it a failure. Mainly because the trees were able to grow very quickly, but they couldn't survive in the long run. So they tried to research what was going on, and they discovered that trees needed wind to be able to develop and to grow to maturity. Without that resistance of wind pushing against them, the trees would wither away and die. You know, like the trees in the dome, our spiritual life will quickly wither for a lack of challenges, even adversity. Sure, we can appear to grow tall and strong, but without the winds of adversity to toughen us up, our outer being becomes soft, without substance, unable to stand even in the slightest of stresses. Don't despise the trials and the difficult times that you face in life. Allow God to use them. Don't try to hide yourself under this bubble to escape from them. Embrace them as the very thing that will make you strong and that will make you healthy. That's why, as the scripture that we read before says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be complete and perfect, lacking nothing. Now, I know many are here that faces those trials and those struggles in life. And I know it's not easy to be thankful during them. But I also know that Jesus told us that He will never leave us, that He will never forsake us. The real truth is that Jesus is our only source of strength and hope in times like this. Maybe there's some here today who has not accepted that strength, not accepted that hope. If that's you, you can come now as we stand and sing.